the title of today's hearing deals with vacant federal properties, and that's been the subject of a lot of my interest since coming to Congress. I'm a former smaller-time real estate developer and business, and when I came to Washington, I saw the opportunity to work with the federal government and its various agencies, because the federal government and the American public are actually the largest property owners of anyone in the world. And part of our basic tenets as Americans is private property ownership, and as government, we have to be good custodians of the property and assets that we hold in trust. The purpose of today's hearing, of course, is that we still have, even with some past efforts, a huge inventory of property, federal property. Some of it we don't even know the complete inventory, and we have thousands of buildings not under GSA, and we'll hear from them, and also USDA today. But we have many, many agencies, DOD, Post Office, with countless numbers of vacant federal properties or underutilized properties and buildings. It's estimated that the inventory of some 270,000 buildings had total operating costs exceeding $18.7 billion, and agencies reported an inventory of over 7,000 underutilized buildings and properties. I think that's, though, just the tip of the iceberg. It's even further than that. About 6 years ago now, I helped produce a report looking at this issue, and the title of the report is the federal government must stop sitting on its assets, sitting on our assets, the federal government's misuse of taxpayer-owned assets. And in the report, which I helped publish as the ranking member of the Transportation Committee, and they have authority over some of the public assets and buildings, we actually highlighted a number of properties that were vacant, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those. In that capacity, I also held a number of hearings along with Mr. Denham, and he helped me as chairman of the subcommittee on public buildings, economic development, public buildings and emergency management was the title. And we held hearings in different locations to highlight, again, some of the issues that we faced with specific properties. On the 25th of April 2013, I held a hearing as chairman of the Government Operations Subcommittee of this full committee, and we held that down the street in an empty warehouse located at 49 L Street Southeast in Washington, D.C. There's a picture of that on the screen. At that hearing, the GSA official who testified is Mr. Gelber, who's here again today, and he told the committee, I have from his testimony, given the high real estate value and rate of growth of the surrounding Capitol riverfront neighborhood, the 49 L Street property presents us with many potential opportunities to find a better use. That's his quote at that hearing. Unfortunately, I'm disappointed to say that GSA did not declare the property excess until 2015, and unfortunately, the warehouse we found is still vacant to this day. So while we've made some progress, that's not one of our stellar examples. The Cotton Exchange, which is down the street, huge swath of property that goes from the mall all the way out to the 395. That a very, very valuable property. Just the Cotton Exchange, we held a hearing there in the vacant building, which has been vacant for years, and some of the adjacent property. That property, we finally got, I think last year, some decision to move forward, and I'm pleased to hear that, but still, we have one of the most valuable assets and property in our nation's capital, still vacant. You may hear some of this from GSA, but we have had some successes and better luck in getting the federal government to act in some other buildings. Let me say, when I started this, I looked a lot at Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, but I also looked several years ago, we took a subcommittee down to NASA, to Cape Canaveral, which is in my own backyard. I'm in Central Florida. We held a hearing there, and there are hundreds of buildings, about half of them vacant, 177,000 acres, 5 times the size of Manhattan, much of it underutilized. The space program, which has been diminished as far as federal participation, a lot of those assets sitting idle, buildings sitting empty. I will report that 177,000 acres, and next to it 16,000 acres, which is owned by the Air Force, just adjacent to it. We're struggling, but we are making some progress with either finding uses for the buildings, tearing some of them down that are expensive to maintain, or looking at additional ways we can utilize those valuable assets for the taxpayer. So that's a little bit of good news on that side. In June, I held a hearing of 2012. I held a hearing in the heating plant in Georgetown, which had been vacant since 2000, costing taxpayers millions of dollars to maintain, empty over more than a decade. In 2013, in fact, when we arrived to conduct the hearing in the empty building, there was a for sale sign that had been put up on the top floor of the building. We asked the witnesses from GSA at the time when they started their marketing plan, and they had told us yesterday, which was the day before the hearing, they put the sign up. So that did go online. It sold to developers for $19 million, and I'm told that property has plans now from the private sector to create a substantial development which will employ people and utilize the property and also pay taxes. In March 2013, we held a hearing, a field hearing actually I held one both in the empty Dreier courthouse, which actually had been vacant since 2007 when they opened the adjacent new federal courthouse. After that hearing, and it was costing us $1.2 million a year to maintain vacant, I was contacted by the president of Miami-Dade Community College, which is across the street. It's like from Rayburn to Longworth buildings, that distance. He had said he had contacted GSA and attempted to find some information on how they could obtain that, use it for classrooms and a judicial center. Nothing happened, so I went down and we held another hearing at the community college to highlight the empty building. That goes back, again, a number of years, and I'm pleased to say that just within the last few months, actually in May, we completed a negotiation. We've transferred over the property to Miami-Dade. It will be the center of judicial studies and architecture. It's a historic, beautiful building in the center of downtown Miami. There's a picture of it there. It has a coquina, which is very rare stone facade, but a magnificent building that we let go into some disrepair will now have a use. But it sat vacant for many, many, many years, costing millions and millions. Another success story that we've had, and also highlighted, the last two were highlighted here in this, sitting on our assets, is the old post office. And we conducted a hearing. It was 32 degrees outside, and in the vacant 15,000 square foot annex behind the post office, we conducted a hearing in 38-degree weather, made a few of the bureaucrats and our staff shiver, but also we were losing up to $6 million a year. The old post office main structure was built in the late 1800s, and it had 400,000 square feet, a magnificent structure just 2 blocks from the White House. And of the 400,000 square feet, half of it was empty, and we were losing between $6 and $8 million a year on that project. Last week, they had the soft opening, and they will open, I think, next month. I'm going next week to view it. It is now the Trump Hotel. There was a tender. Actually, we went down a year later and held a second hearing in the annex again, which will now be the largest ballroom, I'm told, banquet room, east of the Mississippi River. The project will employ hundreds and hundreds of people, millions in tax revenue, and actually revenue to the federal government rather than losses. An incredible example. GSA came and testified earlier that the project was ahead of schedule and under budget. So we can take properties like that and turn them around for the taxpayer and make a big difference. Finally, today, we've invited the Department of Agriculture to our hearing. They'll tell us that they're good about disposing some of their excess property, but unfortunately, some of the data they provide us shows that their annual operating cost for building uses has increased 95% from fiscal year 2014 to 15, and they were unable to provide us with an explanation. We'd like to hear that today. USDA also holds on to poorly utilized properties in prime real estate locations. We can put up on the map one of the biggest properties that USDA has is an agricultural research center in Maryland, just not too many miles from here, and they have 6,500 acres. I think that we pointed out that's the size of the city of Key West, one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the Capital Beltway area, of which, and just a few minutes ago, staff handed me, if we can find the figures. There are only 113 utilized buildings on the property, a total of 379 vacant properties. So that's not a very good record. Some of those are small structures. I've been out there. There's some chicken coops and pig pens and other things that were used years ago. There are also office buildings that are vacant with the windows broken out and vines growing over them. It's not a pretty sight. It's not the way we should handle valuable public assets. So we'll look at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. We have 200 of these research centers, some that date back, I believe, to the 1820s across the country. That's just one example. They had a different role than they have today. And while the Department of Agriculture serves a good purpose, we need to revisit the vacant properties and valuable assets that they hold, maybe don't maintain well. With that, I'd recognize any other members for opening statements.